It's like, who should take it, and is there a population that doesn't really need to take it? As far as like, if let's say you're young, healthy. And then like you just said, like what if about the underlying conditions? Are there people that it could have a negative effect on? And let me just expound on that by saying is, like, I am one who feels that we are over medicated as a population, just in general. Right. Like, so even with vaccinations, I would love if our PCP could look at us individually and say, you need this, you don't need this. Like, because to your point of when we take our kids to the doctor, right. Like I actually do question it. You know what I mean? Because I feel like that, like vaccine injuries are something like they can happen if it's something that my child, if my child's body, rejects. So to sum up that question, are there certain people that don't need to take it, whether it's because of underlying condition or it could negatively affect?
Right. And I think the first group that we know about that we say, hey, be careful with this, is if you have a history of severe allergic reactions, particularly to vaccines. That's somebody who, at the very least, you should talk to your doctor. Everybody who has any questions about whether or not they should be taking it should talk to their doctors. Right. That's the first point. But I keep in mind that, that's speaking from a point of privilege, right? Not everybody has a doctor. Not everybody has that kind of access to care. So I think what I tell people is, if you've got diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, some heart disease, some lung disease like asthma, this shot is designed for you, right? Because COVID's going to do a number on you. This shot is designed to keep you from getting COVID and save your life more than likely. Mm-hmm. Right. So those individuals absolutely should be looking to, and in fact, they're prioritized. They were higher on the list in terms of when to get shots, because if you have any kind of heart disease, any kind of lung disease, then or any kind of chronic medical conditions, you're more likely to have severe COVID and bad outcomes. And so that's why we say, if you've got chronic medical conditions, please get vaccinated as soon as possible. I get a lot of questions about folks with autoimmune conditions, and I have family members who have had lupus or other autoimmune conditions, rheumatoid arthritis, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. For them, the risk isn't actually autoimmune disease itself. It's kind of the fact that they're on medications that turn down their immune system. And so the question is whether or not they would, create a good immune response to the vaccine, right? And so that's, again, a conversation to have with your doctor about how to time the vaccine with your medications to get the maximum benefit. I think that, what we'll find by the end is that everybody can benefit from this vaccine as long as it's safe for them. And I think we're still, investigating how safe it is for kids, that sort of thing. For young adults, keep in mind, we've seen the number of cases is risen sharply in younger Americans. That is how this virus is getting around our communities. Right? Older Americans are not the ones out moving about all over the place. Younger Americans are the ones really spreading this virus and allowing it to really take hold in our communities like this. So by vaccinating them, again, that helps. Now, the COVID vaccine doesn't stop people from getting COVID, but it does stop severe COVID. And I think that's helpful because I've seen really sick 25-year-olds and 30-year-olds. So again, another reason why people should be protected. I think it's kind of akin to, if you're traveling internationally, you say, hey, I finally saved up this cash, I'm going to take this trip. And they say, oh, well, to go to this country, you need the yellow fever vaccine. Well, you're like, all right, I want to take the trip. So yes, I'm going to get the yellow fever vaccine, Yeah, I was I'm sorry. So it's kind of like that in the sense that, like, hey, if we want to get our country really moving again, this vaccine is a key part of it, right? Because we're trying to prevent deaths. That's what it comes down to, and that's what this helps us to do.
Yeah, I think Aaron had a question.
Yeah. So obviously, I appreciate all the great information, Dr. Webb. Been reading a couple articles about the UK with the new a new strain that's coming out. That's been really harming and affecting people. How are we here in the U.S., or how is the vaccine going to be able to pivot or work through that new strain? Do you guys have the ability to kind of understand or figure out in season while it's happening how this vaccine is going to adapt to this new strain that they said could be here possibly in March or beginning of spring? And then the second question is, what are you guys going to do to continue to work globally? Because obviously, like, for example, in certain countries like China, it's like, it's like a free market. There's like 10 million different vaccines out there. Are you going to adapt some of those approaches and moving forward and things of that nature?
Well, and first off, I should say I'm speaking, for me personally. So I'm not speaking on behalf of the administration in this
absolutely.
conversation. But I think that, to your first question about how the vaccine works when we have changes, every virus mutates. They mutate at a different rate. And a lot of people have that question because of the flu and how how influenza works, and they know
Right.
that every year we get a different flu vaccine because the flu mutates, and so you don't know what strain of the flu we're going to get that year, and so the shot from last year won't be effective against the flu this year. Coronaviruses are a little different, and so what they did when they designed this vaccine is they targeted one part of the coronavirus that's pretty consistent. It's called the spike protein. And if you think about like a lock and a key, the spike is actually the key that goes into the keyhole. And the way that it works is there's a cell in your body called the ACE2 receptor, and the spike on a coronavirus is called corona because it's like a crown, and so it's one of those little spikes at the crown. That spike goes right into the receptor in the ACE2 cell, and that's how it gets into the body. Now, that spike itself is pretty long. It's got lots of different proteins in it. When we say it's a variant, that means that some of the proteins have changed. And in fact, the UK variant, we call it B117, it's had a slight change in one of the proteins at the tip of that key that allows it to lock into that cell a little more effectively. That's how it spreads more effectively. Well, the way that the vaccine works is actually pretty impressive. It's a code for the entire spike. And so instead of just focusing in on one little part, one little protein, it's giving your body, hey, this is the list of all the different proteins that are in this spike. And so let's say there's one mutation that allows it to lock into that mechanism a little more easily. Well, your body still has the code to look for all those other parts that didn't mutate, that aren't part of it. And so the vaccine will still be efficient for that reason until there is such a significant change in the spike protein that none of those immune responses that have been created recognize that spike anymore. And I don't think we have any reason to believe that. In fact, they've tested the efficacy of the vaccine against that particular strain, the UK variant. And there's a South African variant, a Brazilian variant, that sort of thing. So we're going to see variants. And I think we're going to see those. You mentioned kind of March, April. That's when we expect, because the UK variant's already here, right? It's in New York, it's in California, it's in Florida, Colorado, Connecticut, right? We've seen it all over. It's probably in every state by now. It spreads faster. What I always say is that, we expect that it's going to become the dominant strain because of how efficiently it spreads. So we have to look out. And I was telling folks the other day, this is a time for us to really buckle down on that mask wearing, right? Because when you have a strain that's less forgiving because it's so good at locking into your cells and getting into your body, you need all the protection you can get, right? So it's going to be a little less forgiving for those things like, not wearing a mask or indoor dining or that sort of stuff. And so we've got to be really careful.
That's important.
Vaccinated. Yeah, important to know.
Yeah. Hey, so we have questions rolling. I'm gonna try to get through these real quick. So one is was asking you to talk about herd immunity. I don't even know what that is. Hopefully you do.
Yeah.
So talk about herd immunity
sure.
too, because we would have many shutdowns.
Yeah, so herd immunity is really the reason why we're doing this to a large extent, right? So the idea is that, you don't need 100% of the population to be vaccinated to stop a virus from spreading. You really just need some percentage so that the virus doesn't have enough places to go after a while. It's just like, well, I can't get them. And eventually, for a virus to stick around, it has to infect at least one other person plus, so more than one other person every time it comes through. So I think the idea of herd immunity, we have various estimates, but we think we have to get about 70 to 80% of the population who aren't at risk of the disease, who are immunized against the disease. Some people get immunity having had a prior infection with COVID, and we know that immunity only lasts a little while. With the number of Americans who've already had COVID, right? And we know we've had millions of Americans who've had COVID. And with the number who are immunized, we still are nowhere near that 70% threshold. We don't want to get to that 70% threshold by people just naturally getting COVID, just because the number of people who would die if it came down that way, right? And so the vaccine at least helps protect against severe COVID and protect against death. And so that's where herd immunity comes in. We say, well, we've got to vaccinate our way to herd immunity. And that's why, you've heard President-elect Biden saying 100 million shots in 100 days. So that tells you by April 30th, that's almost a third of the American people are going to be vaccinated. And that's huge because it helps prevent that spread of the virus. And hopefully we exceed that number, right? Hopefully we go even beyond that. And what I'm always looking to is I'm saying, you say 100 million people, you can find 100 million people, but are you getting the communities that are hardest hit? There's been this graphic circulating of Washington, D.C., and it shows where people are dying on one side, and then it shows where people are getting vaccinated on the other. And it's completely different communities, right? And I think that's where we say some of that is that vaccine hesitancy. It's folks saying, I don't know if I want to get that. But some of it is just a lack of access. There are three parts of vaccine hesitancy, and one of them is convenience. Can I actually get this? And so we've got to make sure we're designing an immunization program that allows everybody to have access. But yeah, that's how we have to get to herd immunity. We want to get there as quickly as possible because, yes, we're kind of in the heat of it right now. But if we can cut this thing off and stop the spread of this virus, then we have a real chance of having, more and more of a return of normalcy as 2021 wears on.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Just one more, and I know Giles had one. So the listener states, I've heard a lot of people say since I've had COVID or suspected that I had it, I can't get it again. For those who prayerfully have not gotten the virus, if they get the vaccine, what is the probability of their immunity to the disease? Also, does the vaccine prevent transmission to others if someone who had it and recently got over it gets vaccinated, then goes out around other people, or the reverse, is asymptomatic and gets vaccinated and is around people?
Yeah, so really good questions there. So first thing that we learned pretty early on in the pandemic was that you can get infected with COVID more than once. And so, that's a little bit challenging because somebody has an infection and we hope, okay, they're out of the list of people who could get infected. No, with COVID, that immunity doesn't last long enough for you to not get infected again. That's where the immunity we have from the vaccine is actually better. So for folks who've had COVID before, if it's been at least 90 days, which is our recommendation, then we say get vaccinated to make sure that you have a longer immunity to this. Now the question here is, does the vaccine prevent people from getting COVID, period, right? What we know that it does is it keeps people from dying. It keeps people from having severe COVID, so getting hospitalized. It keeps people from being symptomatic. But we don't have, complete proof at this point that it keeps people from getting infected at all. And that's important, right? Because we know that 40% of people who get COVID have no symptoms whatsoever. But for that other 60%, COVID does a number on you. And for some people, they have it for months. And so for that 40%, they're like, oh, okay, I didn't even know I had COVID. I just, got an antibody test and found I had it. Well, that's more of what people would experience. Here's the thing. If you have an asymptomatic infection, you can spread it to your grandma who hasn't been vaccinated, right? And so the key here is people still are going to need to wear masks. They're still going to need to physically distance until we can keep the virus from spreading, period. Now, the Moderna vaccine, they've actually said they think that it actually could prevent asymptomatic spread. And they said there was a trend toward people not even getting infected. The AstraZeneca vaccine, they're saying the same thing. It's a matter of how they designed the study. Were they testing for that? The Pfizer study wasn't testing for whether or not people get asymptomatic spread. They were testing for whether or not people are dying or getting hospitalized or getting sick. So I think, it's possible that we may learn in the near future that, hey, these vaccines actually stop people from getting infected, period. And that would be great. But at the very least, we know they stop people from getting really sick with COVID, and that's really important. And so I think that's kind of what we know. We know that we're still going to be using some of these public health measures, even with vaccine going out in our communities. But I think we got to be really careful because I think people want to get the shot in their arm, then go like throw a party, right? And be like, we're all vaccinated.
Listen, that's all I hear.
It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. You got to stay safe until the vaccine's not spreading in our community anymore.
Right.
And that's when you can be like, okay, when there's no spread in our community, that's when we can get back to some semblance of normal.